So tonight is the night when I chose really, to talk about the 5 mindfulness trainings. And I recognize that some of you may have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. So I will explain. I hope you got one of the little pamphlets that has the mindfulness trainings on it. It's a little white fold up. Um, when the Buddha was living, he collected a lot of monks and nuns as his disciples. And when they were ordained, they always made a vow to follow certain precepts. So there were lay people who wanted to kind of be included in that. And so the Buddha came up with 5 precepts for lay people. And can you pull that up? Monks and nuns take a vow to, I don't even know how many precepts, it's a lot. So thankfully, we only have 5. So these are the 5 precepts that, and these will be translated differently according to who was in charge that day or whatever. But these are the 5 precepts from the Buddha. And I like the way this is stated because it's clear from the beginning that we are encouraged. He says, I undertake to abstain from killing. I also like that this particular version shows us how it's like the remedy, loving kindness. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my mind. The second precept, I undertake to not take what has not been given. That, in our terms, that would be called stealing or some form of stealing. And the remedy for that is open-handed generosity. I purify my mind. The third training, or the third precept, is I undertake to abstain from sexual misconduct. And the remedy is with stillness, simplicity, and contentment, I purify my body. The fourth precept that the Buddha wrote, I undertake to refrain from falsehood. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. And the last one is, I undertake to abstain from intoxicants. With mindfulness, clear and radiant, I purify my mind. Now, these are the 5 precepts that our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, brought up to date. He kind of wrote the 5 mindfulness trainings to make the precepts kind of more in tune with the way we live now. And change the wording just a little bit, but I think you'll see as we read the 5 mindfulness trainings that they pretty clearly follow these particular precepts. The 5 mindfulness trainings are, as I said, Thich Nhat Hanh's version of these 5 precepts. And I'm going to read from this little book. It's called the Mindfulness Survival Kit. It's a great book, and unfortunately we don't have any here, but you could get it online on Amazon, I'm sure. You can also get it at a bookstore called Parallax Press. They carry a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh books. So this is what Thai says about the 5 mindfulness trainings. The mindfulness teachings are a wide path out of suffering, not necessarily connected with a particular religion. Buddhism was developed as a teaching path rather than a religion. So these are the things that Thich Nhat Hanh is wanting us to understand when we come across these mindfulness trainings. He also said that his hope was that these mindfulness trainings would represent a Buddhist contribution to a global ethic, a way for the human species to sustain itself in these dangerous and difficult times. And this was written in the, well, it was written a long time ago, probably in the late 60s. This particular book was published in 2014, but they've been around for a long time. And so some of us have made a commitment to do our best to live according to these 5 mindfulness trainings. And one of the things we agreed to was that if we didn't read them within a 3-month period, the transmission would be void. And so I try to do this with us at least once every 3 months. And I think it's been at least 3 months since we did it last time, so it's time to do it again. So if you would look at your little pamphlet, first mindfulness training. So let me explain this, because when we read them, I will, at the end of each one, you'll hear me say, you'll hear me ask a question. Have you made an effort to study, observe, and practice it during the last 3 months? And this is directed to those of you who have actually taken the transmission trainings. And it's nothing to be answered out loud, it's just answered in memory. So know that if you haven't taken the transmission for the trainings, you're not, well, you can think about it if you like, of course, but it's not, it's directed more at the other people. So there will be a bell and then an announcement for the reading, and then there will be a reader. First mindfulness training, reverence for life.
Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world in my thinking or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world.
Thank you, Trudy. You have a card. I think you were given a card when you came in and a pen. So just if you like, you can either make a note to yourself or something that will help you remember if you have a question about one of these trainings. So using Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Mindfulness Survival Kit, I'm going to read some of the things that he says about each of the trainings. This particular quote is about reverence for life. This is just, I'm only reading one little bit. There's a lot of good information in here. So he says, prayer or good intention is not enough to change an angry or violent situation. The first mindfulness training is a reminder that you have to practice to train yourself to lessen violence through understanding. And he said you can do that by practicing mindfulness. That means instead of just reacting quickly to whatever stimulus is around us or that provokes us, we go back to our breathing, we calm our body, we stop the thinking, and we bring our minds back to the body in the present moment. So he's giving us one tip about how to be less reactive and to avoid feeling any kinds of violent situations in our own lives. There's a lot more to it, of course, but probably spend a whole hour on each one of them, but we're not going to do that tonight. I think this is good to remember. He says, unless we have the practice of understanding and compassion, even if we try to help in a situation in which there's tension, we may not succeed. And then he gives an example that's very timely. He said, suppose South Korea sends North Korea a large shipment of grain and other foods, saying that the North needs a lot of food for the poor people to survive. South Korea may be motivated by the good intention to prevent starvation in the North, but the North may see it as an attempt to discredit them. And though the North were saying that as though the North were saying that totally messing this up. As though the South were saying that the North isn't capable of feeding its own population. So there's an example of how a good intention is not always helpful. When I was growing up in the Baptist church, I heard this statement a lot. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't know if that's exactly what Ty's talking about, but that's what I thought about when I read it. So another wonderful thing about this book is that it gives us some concrete practices to use for each of the mindfulness trainings. And the first mindfulness training, he really encourages to do walking meditation so that we calm ourselves with walking and that we begin to come back to ourselves knowing that we're not really wanting to support any kind of violence, and giving ourselves a chance to come up with a better way to respond. I like this little quote too. Every day you walk somewhere, so adding walking meditation to your life doesn't take a lot of additional time or require you to go anywhere different. Choose a place, a staircase, your driveway, or the distance from one tree to another to do walking meditation every day. Every path can be a walking meditation. And then the other concrete practice that he suggests is to share the practice. I think if somebody saw me walking in my front yard mindfully, they might be tempted to say, what are you doing? And that's a way to share. That's the way to share. So I'm going to read the second mindfulness training. True happiness.
Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting. I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others, and I will share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. That true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion, and that running after wealth, fame, power, and sensual pleasures can bring much suffering and despair. I'm aware that happiness depends on my mental attitude and not on external conditions, and that I can live happily in the present moment simply by remembering that I already have more than enough conditions to be happy. I am committed to practicing right livelihood so that I can help reduce the suffering of living beings on Earth and stop contributing to climate change.
This is the second of the 5 mindfulness trainings. Have you made an effort to study, observe, and practice it during the last 3 months? A little bit from Ty's book. He says each of us have an idea about happiness. And he gives some examples. I really want that diploma. If only I had that position, then I would be happy. We have an idea about what will make us happy. If you haven't been able to be happy, maybe it's because you're holding firmly to your idea of happiness. If you can let go of that idea, happiness can come more easily. Imagine that there are many doors that open to happiness. If you open every door, then happiness has many ways to come to you. But the situation is that you closed all the doors except one, and that is why happiness can't come. So don't close any doors. Open all the doors. Release the idea of happiness that you have, and then happiness can come today. That's the if only positions. If only I had this. Thing is, I've noticed that a lot of times when people get that thing, not happy. There's something about it that still causes them to be unhappy. So, concrete practices for true happiness. The main one, he says, is remembering the conditions of happiness. And that's why you have that, one reason you have that card. If you want to do it now and while we're talking the rest of the time, just to make a little list of the things that make you happy, the things you already know in your life. You know, simple things like breathing. Things that, you know, it's like recognizing what we already have in our lives that contribute to our happiness. I need a volunteer to lead third mindfulness training. Training, true love.
Aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I am committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Knowing that sexual desire is not love, and that sexual activity motivated by craving always harms myself as well as others. I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without mutual consent, true love, and a deep, long-term commitment. I resolve to find spiritual support for the integrity of my relationship from family members, friends, and Sangha, with whom there is support and trust. I will do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. Seeing that body and mind are interrelated, I am committed to learn appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy, to cultivate the 4 basic elements of true love: kindness, passion, joy, and inclusiveness. for the greater happiness of myself and others. Recognizing the diversity of human experience, I am committed not to discriminate against any form of gender identity or sexual orientation. Practicing true love, we know that we will continue beautifying into the future.
This is the third of the 5 mindfulness trainings. Have you made an effort to study, practice, and observe it during the last month? One of the keys in this section, Ty talks about this particular mindfulness training. This is a statement that I loved so much. I actually wrote it on a Post-it note that I stick on my computer. It says, "You must love in such a way that the person you love feels free." Okay. I love this too. Ty says the third mindfulness training is about learning how to practice true love. Many songs have lyrics that say, "I love you, I need you," as if loving simply means using another person to fulfill your need. We are taught to think that love is the feeling you have when you think you can't survive with the other person. How many times have you heard that in a song? I don't know if this is exactly the same, but the first time I heard that Whitney Houston song where she said, "I'm everything I am because you love me," oh, I get on my soapbox about that, but yeah. So I think it's just important that we, when we love someone, we, like he said, we love them in such a way that they feel free to express themselves, free to, be themselves. True love is generated from within. With true love, you feel complete in yourself. You don't need something from outside to make you feel whole. True love is like the shining sun. The sun is sufficient in itself. It offers light to everyone. It doesn't say, "I only want to offer light to this one person." It's not exclusive. It doesn't exclude. So the concrete practices for this one, primarily, he calls it a mindful diet. And the 5th mindfulness training, we'll talk about this a lot, but mindfulness training reminds us that it's sometimes necessary to take care of our sexual energy. And then he suggests that physical exercise can help with that. And he also talks about metta meditation, which is a kind of loving kindness meditation, so that we fill ourselves first with loving kindness, and then we offer it to someone else. If we have time at the end, maybe we'll do a brief metta meditation so you'll have an idea what that means. So you can continue to work on your things that make me happy. This too. And now I need a volunteer for the 4th one. Bell. 4th mindfulness training, deep listening and loving speech.
Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups, and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and to look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and any other person. I will speak and listen in a way that can help myself and the other person to transform suffering and see the way out of difficult situations. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain, and not to utter words that can cause division or discord. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness.
This is the fourth of the 5 mindfulness trainings. Have you made an effort to study, observe, and practice it in the last month? In 3 months? So here's a little bit of what Ty says about deep listening and loving speech. The fourth mindfulness training focuses on right speech and deep listening because we can only understand another person when we're able to truly listen to them. And he says you can begin to practice this on your own by listening to yourself in your meditation. Listening deeply to another is also a form of meditation. This, let me see. Whole thing too, but it's also good. He said sometimes when we attempt to listen to another person, we can't hear them because we haven't listened to ourselves. Our own strong emotions and thoughts are so loud in us, crying out for our attention, that we can't hear the other person. It also happens that when we're listening to someone, somehow something they say to trigger something within us. And then, it's hard to keep listening. That's why it's important to have this mindfulness practice of breathing. So that if you're listening and you really want to be listening, then when that happens, if something like that happens, you just go back to your breath. You're present with yourself, and you remind yourself, oh, that triggered me. So as long as you recognize it, you're aware of it, you can breathe and get mindful again and be a good listener. It's important to remember that you listen only with one purpose, and that is to help the other person to suffer less. That also helps to overcome that problem of getting triggered. So listening very important. And how you listen is important. There's more about that, but I'll leave you to read the book. But now let's talk about the speech part, because this is equally as important. He says, so much harm is caused by wrong speech. The first mindfulness training is about not causing violence and not killing. Violence can be caused by our speech, not just by our physical actions. Buddhist texts mention 4 kinds of wrong speech: lying, exaggerating or embellishing the truth, speaking in order to cause division, insulting and speaking badly about others. And then he even explains what he means, what lying is. And I won't read all of that to you, but there's a couple of things here that I think are important. He says, lying also includes twisting the truth or saying what's partially true. Exaggerating means intentionally making something out to be greater or more extreme than it was. So we are encouraged to refrain from doing that in this fourth mindfulness training. So what are the concrete steps for practicing this? Um, First, concrete practice he talks about is right thinking. That's one of the one of the eightfold paths. Sooner or later, he says, if you want to practice right speech, we have to practice right thinking, because sooner or later we'll inevitably speak and act according to the way we think. Sounds true. So anyway, he gives an idea about how to remedy that. The second concrete practice is not gossiping. Gossip does a tremendous amount of damage, he says. And so he says to be careful about not talking negatively about someone behind their back, even if our intention is to help that person. The other concrete practice is something he calls the 6 mantras. And this one, sometimes hard for us, speaking from my own experience. The first mantra is, I am here for you. Now that one's not so hard. Most of us can truthfully say to somebody that we know is hurting, I'm here for you. Second one, I know you're there and I am very happy. So we probably do that with people that we love. Just letting them know that we're happy to be with them. The third mantra is, I feel your pain and I am here for you. He says, I or someone else may have said this or done something to hurt the other person. If I have hurt him, I want to know about it, but I don't expect him to be able to talk about it right away. It may still be too painful, but I do want the other person to know that I'm sensitive to his pain and that I'm ready just to sit, breathe, and be with him. So I take from that it's when you know that you have caused someone else to suffer or to have pain, that's a way to approach it. And the fourth one is, I suffer, please help. Well, it's hard for most of us to admit that we're suffering and need help. The fifth one is, this is a happy moment. He says this mantra can be practiced at any moment. You may have just sat down to a meal together and someone can ask, what kind of moment is this? And someone else will reply, this is a happy moment. We have the tendency to forget the happiness that is available at any moment. And now we're back to, wisdom, the things that we already have that are happy. And the sixth mantra is, you're partly right. He says this mantra helps us from falling into the complexes of inferiority and superiority. Sometimes you receive a lot amount of praise. You do need to be praised from time to time, but you want to be careful not to become too proud because of the praise. So you say to yourself or out loud, you're partly right. It means, yes, I do have that gift, that talent, but it's not just mine. It has been handed down to me by my ancestors, and everyone has talents and gifts of some kind. So those are the 6 mantras that he suggests. And the fourth concrete way to establish loving speech and deep listening is to keep communications open. I think that one is extremely important. If we can't talk to one another, it's really difficult to understand. Who would like to read the fifth one? Fifth mindfulness training, very short.
Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will practice looking deeply into how I consume the four kinds of nutriments, namely edible foods, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. I am determined not to gamble or to use alcohol, drugs, or any other products which contain toxins, such as certain websites, electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations. I will practice coming back to the present moment, to be in touch with the refreshing, healing, and nourishing elements in me and around me, not letting regrets and sorrow drag me back into the past, nor letting anxieties, fear, or craving pull me out of the present moment. I'm determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will contemplate interbeing, consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and my consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family, my society.
This is the fifth of the 5 mindfulness trainings. Have you made an effort to study, observe, and practice it during the last 3 months? This mindfulness training covers a lot of territory. And it mentions 4 kinds of nutriment or food. So there's edible food, which is pretty easy to understand. Sense impressions. Sense impressions refers to the things we take in through our senses, the things we see, the things we hear, the things we taste, the things we listen to. You know, all of those are part of our sense impressions. So if we're filling our minds with toxins, you know, that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to refrain from. Mindful eating is one of the concrete ways to practice this. Ryan makes a point, and I think he's right. He says many of us eat unconsciously. We're rushing from one place to another, talking while we eat, or struggling to feed the family after a tiring day of work. And I can relate to all of those things. I was telling Paul before we started, I was eating an English muffin on the way here. And then he says, many of us get our food from a place like the supermarket that is very disconnected from the place where our food is grown. Every time before we eat a piece of food, it's good to practice looking deeply to see where that piece of food has come from. It might discourage us from eating it. There's the next thing that he talks about, besides edible and sense impressions, what I talked about just now. He goes on a little bit more. He even says that ads on billboards make an impression on us. Conversations we overhear or take part in, videos we watch, texts that we receive, all of these things, he says, penetrate into us whether we want them to or not. when you have a conversation with a friend, you consume. Volition is another kind of nutriment. Volition is something that I had trouble understanding. What is it? It's not a word that we use very often, and so I couldn't understand what he meant when he said volition is the third source of nutriment. Well, he does explain. Volition is your aspiration, your deepest desire, what you want to do with your life. And he says, many of us don't take the time to sit down and identify our deepest desires. Then he gives some examples of good desires or desires that will help the planet, help one another. But there's also, he says, if your deepest desire is to have more money, fame, power, sensual pleasure, this is toxic food that leads to craving, attachment, overwork, taking what should go to others, and other forms of living without mindfulness. So that's the volition that does not contribute to anybody's health or well-being. Another, so examples of the things he says is helpful. If your deepest desire in you is to help save your planet, this is good nourishing food. If your deepest desire is to help children to be better protected, to have better education, to have better environment, that is good food. And then it goes on to that other, but it's not good food. The last nutriment that he talks about is the nutriment is consciousness. And as we have many good things in our consciousness, like mindfulness, concentration, insight, love, compassion, and joy. If we know the practice of mindfulness, we may touch the seeds of joy, happiness, mindfulness, and wisdom in us so that we become wholesome, healthy energies. That is good consumption. This particular mindfulness training covers a lot of ground. So it's important, I think, to study it as much as we can. Let me just digress here a little bit. Because this book is not readily available, I don't know if it's been reprinted or redone, because since this book was printed, the third mindfulness training has been rewritten. So it's not what you read in the fold, the little fold out, that's the updated one. What's in this book is the old one. And so I'm sure they're redoing this, but it's not available yet. So you can get the mindfulness trainings if you're interested. You can certainly have the little fold out thing that we got tonight, take it home, that's fine. Or you can go online to the Plum Village website. Just Google Plum Village and you'll get a website, then look for mindfulness down the side. Click on that and you can read the 5 mindfulness trainings online. Concrete practices. He mentions mindful eating, and we have something called the 5 contemplations. And we have a copy of that on the refrigerator in the little kitchen. You can check that out. Another concrete practice is selective television watching. I think most of us are pretty selective about television watching. But, sometimes, in my experience, sometimes we start to watch something that looks fine at the beginning, but then it turns dark or ugly or violent. And yeah. So you can't always know, what you're getting into, but you do have resources. You can shut it off, change the channel. So those are the concrete practices that Ty mentions for nourishment and healing. All right, so we are just about out of time. And so on your little card, you've written down some things that you already have to help you be happy. Which of these mindfulness trainings is kind of calling you to practice more diligently in the next week? Let's say. You can just write that on the card too. That will help you. Let me go back to that first, the Buddha's 5 precepts. I just want you to see how closely Thich Nhat Hanh has followed the Buddha's precepts. So abstain from killing. That's the first mindfulness training reference for life. Undertake to not take what has not been given. I wonder if that was written that way. It seems poorly written to me. Grammar is kind of weird. That one corresponds to the second mindfulness. I undertake to abstain from sexual misconduct. Third one, true love. I undertake to refrain from falsehood. That's deep listening and loving speech. And then the last one, I undertake to abstain from intoxicants. That is the fifth mindfulness training, nourishment and healing. So Ty didn't just make these up out of thin air. He's really a Buddhist scholar. And so he's taken these precepts and put them in a form that can be really useful to us in our lives. I just want to say one more thing about the mindfulness trainings. They're meant to be a guide, not a dogma, not the commandments. As I read at the beginning, Buddhism is meant to be a teaching tool, it's not a religion. So it's a guide. This is a guide. It reminds me, and I've heard this said before, of the North Star. In the old days, navigators used the North Star to navigate. And so these mindfulness trainings are like a tool to navigate by. It's to help us navigate to a life with less suffering, with more happiness, and more freedom to develop who we really are. So it's like the North Star in that. Let's say one more thing. There's a lot of words in here. And each training, like I said before, we could talk about it for a whole hour. But one interesting thing, since it's not the gospel, since it's not a commandment, you can actually just take a part of any one of these mindfulness trainings, something that kind of sticks with you, and you think, well, that would be helpful if I could cultivate that, if I could get to be more mindful about that. You can just take one little piece, even one sentence, Um, like, here's a piece that I think would help me. Um, if you want to help someone reduce their fear, anger, and suspicion, you first have to practice to reduce the amount of fear, anger, and suspicion in yourself. So it's just the part, reduce the amount of fear, anger, and suspicion in yourself. That's enough to focus on. You don't really have to read the whole thing and try to memorize it or try to completely live that way. In fact, Ty says nobody can follow them perfectly. We can't do it all. Which is like one of the things we say at the end of, we will say this in a few minutes in the closing chant. Countless beings we vow to free. Yeah. Countless beings we vow to free. Ceaseless afflictions we vow to end. Limitless truth doors we vow to open. The deepest paths of awakening we vow to realize. So we're saying we vow to do the impossible, pretty much. And so again, this is meant to be an aspiration. It's meant to be a guide. It's not meant to be judgment, because you could, if you wanted to take this literally, we could all kind of feel pretty discouraged. So we do what we can, and that's the same thing with 5 mindfulness trainings. We live the best we can, and in fact, I like how the Buddha said in his things, I undertake to abstain. That's what we do. And we have a lot of help in Thai's teachings and in the Sangha. We can rely on one another. We know that because we take refuge in it. And in the Buddha nature within ourselves, in the teachings, the Dharma. If you have any questions or you want to talk about any of these things, I'm going to be hanging out for a while here. I'd be happy to talk to you. But we need to see if there's some announcements and get ready for our closing.
Short. Thank you everyone for being here. For you, please come check in with me before heading out. I've got a free pen and a program for you, and also feel free to ask me any questions. Dallas Meditation Center hosts events that are meant to be about wellness, education, or heart-to-heart connection promoting. So Paul pulled up what our webpage looks like. Feel free to check that. What we're creating here. We've got a lot of good stuff going on, such as sound bath, club, authentic relating, and so on. Every first Sunday of the month, we go out after the gathering for Thai dinner, like the Bangkok.
Bangkok on Beltline.
I can't remember. So if you're interested in getting to spend some time with your community member for Sundays, it's good to help. I'll leave it as that. If anyone else wants to add more, the floor is open, but I'll bow out here.
This is a note I made in the section about nourishment and healing. And it says, feed the Sangha with your presence and your donations. I mean, that's how we survive, on your donation. So whatever you can donate is appreciated. And your presence here is a gift that is really important to all of us. So thank you. So at the bottom of your program, there's something called a closing chant. which I read to you a minute ago. And now we're gonna chant it. And we're gonna think, I'm gonna think. I will do the best I can to do these things. Countless beings we vow to free, ceaseless afflictions we vow to end, limitless truth doors we vow to open, the deepest paths of awakening we vow to realize.